Now, would you call this bright and charming young woman sitting next to me a geek? No, you wouldn't, right? I thought so. Because we think geeks are bookish, boring and nerdy people. But this lovely lady demolishes that preconceived and presumptuous notion, and she tells us that geekiness is actually synonymous with passion and inventiveness. And after reading her book, I am convinced. Meet Angela Saini, author of The Geek Nation. Very essential and important reading for science buffs and lay people alike. I'm so happy to meet you, and I'd like to thank you for opening the doors to a world which I always found forbidding.
Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
You know, if you are a non-science person and you're about to zone out because you think that this is going to be some kind of a highbrow, jargon-ridden chat, I urge you to stay on because you're going to be missing something very interesting, because Angela is not only prodigiously bright and intelligent, but the book is written in a very easy, accessible and breezy style. It looks at whether India has the markings to become the next scientific superpower, and as I said earlier, it's written in the most beautiful style. Now, Angela, you have a master's in engineering from the Oxford University, but you've become a science journalist and an award-winning one at that, and now you've written this book. So I'm wondering, like all your other engineering colleagues, don't you miss tinkering around in the practical do-it bit of engineering?
I do. I miss it every day. I really wish that sometimes that I could be back in an engineering lab, be building things. For my last birthday, a friend got me 2 robot kits, so I could build robots in my spare time, and I was very grateful for that. That was a really clever present to give me. But then I love journalism, I love writing, and this book has been a pure pleasure from start to finish.
Now, in your preface, you talk about the Bakshali manuscript, which is believed to have been written in 700 AD. It was unearthed in 1881 in a small village in a northern province of India, where the British took it away. It's now displayed in the Bodleian Library in the Oxford University. So, can you tell us a little more about the manuscript and whether that too served as a catalyst for you to write this book?
There isn't a huge amount of history in Geek Nation, but in trying to understand Indian science, it's quite natural to ask yourself, where do the roots of this geeky culture come from? And so I couldn't help trying to dig out old manuscripts and visiting libraries. I went to some incredible ones. So I wanted to see what is the oldest scientific text in India. And ironically, it's not in India anymore, it's in Oxford, which is where I studied. So I had to go back to England before I could see it. And I was very fortunate that Oxford University, it's kept behind glass and it's not for public view, but they very kindly let me see it. It's incredible, a palm leaf manuscript, old and crumbling, just tiny kind of fragments, brown with very dark black signs all over it. And you can see even then groups of symbols together. Very early scientific thought, very early mathematics, and it was just a glimpse of true history. I was just overcome.
If you will allow me, I'd like to talk a bit about how Angela began her research in India. She visited the Vikram Sarabhai Space Center in Tumba first, where she met Professor Udupi Ramchandra Rao, 78 years old, one of the oldest rocket scientists in the world, who played a major part in the early years of the Indian space program. He was great friends with Arthur C. Clarke, and he went on to become the chairman of ISRO in 1984. His conversations with Angela are peppered with very interesting anecdotes, and through his reminiscences, Angela touches briefly upon the International Space Race Program, with the US and the Soviet Union launching their crafts into space. She looks at the beginnings of Indian scientific development with Vikram Sarabhai and Jawaharlal Nehru at the helm of it all, because Nehru believed that every Indian must cultivate the scientific temper because it is essential for the progress of the nation. Now, chapter 1, which is titled Brain Games, looks at every Indian's obsession with braininess. Now, while in the Olympics, in the history of the games, India has won only 20 medals so far. In the Science Olympiad, the scene is completely different. I'd like Angela to read a very small excerpt from the book.
Yeah, so I visited the National Training Centre for the Olympiad students, and this is what I found there. The physics Olympiad team, who went to the United Kingdom in 2000, won 2 gold medals and 2 bronze, ending up 3rd overall in the world. Then there's Vietnam in 2008, where they took 4 gold medals, and Mexico in 2009, where they came home with 4 gold and 1 silver. A 19-year-old girl that was once trained at this National Training Centre won a bronze medal in physics, and she's just had a paper on quantum physics published in an international science journal, and most children her age don't even read scientific journals. So it's quite incredible what these children have managed to achieve in an international forum, that even though India does so poorly in the Olympics, in the Olympic Games, the physical Olympics, in the academic Olympiads, they're just phenomenally good.
But Angela, is this always necessarily a good thing? Because the Indian school system, it fosters competitiveness, and there's a lot of emphasis on performance, and all-round development takes a beating. What are your observations there?
There is this dynamic. The IT industry, because outsourcing doesn't require a huge amount of innovation, it is very drone-like work sometimes, and that's fed into the culture that exists in the engineering colleges, which is to produce not very creative graduates. So the kind of rote learning system that you have in a lot of schools has been fed into the IT industry. That in turn has fed back, and it's kind of this vicious circle. So I'll just read you a section from the book where I visit Tata Consultancy Services, and that's here in Chennai. And I'm interviewing a guy called Anand Krishnan, who is the head of innovation in TCS. The uncomfortable truth that Krishnan is wrestling with is that Tata Consultancy Services doesn't put nearly as much effort into basic scientific research, the font of new inventions, as foreign companies do. Europe, the US and Japan remain light years ahead of India on this front. Microsoft spends about $9 billion on research and development in a year. The computer chip maker Intel spends almost $6 billion. And Samsung is aiming to triple spending to more than $22 billion. Meanwhile, TCS spends only 1/3% of the money it makes on research, amounting to only $16 million. It's a strategy that depends on other firms coming up with inventions so they can piggyback off them. So that shows you, demonstrates a problem that these big IT companies have. They're vast, they're making huge amounts of money, but their profit margins are small, so they can't invest so much in research.
And the scene is rather similar when she visits the Infosys campus in Bangalore and meets Narayana Murthy. I'd like to read a bit here, that Infosys has become a world-famous technology hub in its own right. It's stuffed with eccentric geniuses and freshly minted millionaires. At least that's until it comes to innovation. On this front, it's scarcely better than a retirement village. To date, the city hasn't produced a single company to rival Microsoft, IBM, Apple or Google, which make cutting-edge products and software that the whole world is using. Lucrative though it is, most of the work being done in Bengaluru tends to be day-to-day maintenance and routine software development. So she goes to meet Narayana Murthy. Until now, the situation is looking rather grim. Angela is skeptical. We feel a bit hopeless. But things change at page 75 when she goes back to IIT. It's her second visit, and she sees that there's quite a few fascinating inventions and a lot of creative work happening. We're going to talk about that after a short break. So if you're slowly becoming a geek, stay tuned to complete that process when we come back after a short break.